Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel Asterisk. What if I told you that a single railway determined the very future of Canada? The Canadian Pacific Railway (CPR) wasn't just steel and timber stretching across vast distances. It was the spine of a fragile young nation struggling to stay united. This monumental project helped shape Canada's identity, defined its borders, and ensured its survival. But behind this ambitious dream lay political drama, daunting landscapes, and a staggering human cost. The story of the CPR is not just about trains, it's about the very making of a country. Following Confederation in 1867. Canada faced immense challenges in uniting its vast and sparsely populated territories. There was a pressing need to establish strong east-west connections before the United States expanded further northward. The fear of American encroachment wasn't paranoia, it was a real and constant concern. In fact, many American settlers were already moving into western regions. British Columbia, geographically isolated on the Pacific coast, agreed to join the Confederation in 1871 only after the federal government promised to build a transcontinental railway. This promise was more than a token of inclusion. It was a critical commitment to national unity and sovereignty. The vision was bold: to stretch a ribbon of steel from the Atlantic to the Pacific, linking the provinces in both commerce and culture, and bringing remote communities under one flag. Planning such a railway was considered by many to be nearly impossible. The terrain across Canada was daunting: rocky mountains, vast prairies, and treacherous northern forests. Initial surveys exposed just how massive and difficult the project would be. Engineers had to contend with brutal winters, mosquito-infested swamps, and mountain passes that defied conventional construction methods. As if the geography wasn't challenging enough, the political scene was equally turbulent. In 1873, the Pacific Scandal erupted when Prime Minister John A. Macdonald's conservative government was implicated in accepting bribes from businessmen vying for the railway contract. The scandal forced Macdonald to resign and temporarily halted progress on the railway despite the setback. Macdonald returned to power in 1878, determined to fulfill the promise made to British Columbia and to complete the railway at any cost. A new strategy emerged: rely on private enterprise. In 1881, the Canadian Pacific Railway Company was established under a group of investors, including George Stephen and Donald Smith. The government offered generous subsidies and land grants, and the CPR Company took on the Herculean task of constructing the railway. Their involvement marked a turning point, transferring responsibility from a struggling government to a motivated, profit-driven corporation determined to get the job done. What followed was a race against time, geography, and economic odds, a story that would continue to shape the Canadian narrative for generations. Asterisk. Construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway was nothing short of a monumental struggle, one often described as building through hell. The labor force was vast and diverse, consisting of Chinese workers, European immigrants, veterans of past wars, and local settlers in search of work. Among them, Chinese laborers made up a large and essential portion, especially in British Columbia, where the terrain was most treacherous. These men endured extreme and often fatal conditions, facing avalanches, rockslides, and exposure to dynamite during blasting operations. Many lived in crude camps without proper sanitation or medical care, making disease and injury a constant threat. The engineering challenges were equally staggering. Massive bridges, deep tunnels, and towering wooden trestles had to be constructed, often in unforgiving wilderness. Through the Rockies, workers battled snow, stone, and gravity itself to lay track where none thought it was possible. The human cost was severe. Hundreds died, most of them Chinese workers, whose efforts were often unrecognized and whose treatment was brutally unequal compared to their white counterparts. Even as physical progress continued, the CPR project teetered on the brink of collapse more than once. Financial crises struck hard. The cost of pushing through Canada's wilderness far exceeded early estimates. At several points, construction nearly stopped altogether due to lack of funds and mounting debt. The CPR company begged for government bailouts while investors debated pulling out. Winters added their own brand of misery blanketing progress, under thick snow and isolating camps for months. Despite it all, political pressure to complete the railway mounted. There was more at stake than steel tracks, the very credibility of Canada's young federal government and the unity of the nation hung in the balance. Against all odds, the final stretch of track made its way to a remote location in British Columbia called Craigellachie. On November 7, 1885, a moment steeped in symbolism and relief finally arrived. Donald Smith, one of the railway's chief financiers, drove the last spike into the ground. This ceremonial act marked the official completion of the Transcontinental Railway. Though the event lasted only minutes, it captured decades of ambition, labor, and sacrifice. Canada had achieved the unthinkable, a steel ribbon joining Atlantic to Pacific, binding a sprawling and disconnected country into something more cohesive and proud. The legacy of the CPR is as vast and complex as the land it crosses. On one hand, it opened up the Canadian West to economic opportunity, sparking the growth of towns, agriculture, resource extraction, and trade routes. Telegraph lines and mail services followed the railway, further tightening the weave of national infrastructure. But alongside progress came a darker impact. Indigenous peoples were displaced, their lands seized or bought under duress, their ways of life permanently altered. The railway ushered in a wave of settlers and industries that transformed ecosystems and marginalized entire communities. Today, the CPR stands as a symbol of Canada's ambition and ingenuity, but also of the deep inequalities that fueled its stuntosis. As fueled its success, historians continue to debate who truly benefited from the railway and who paid its highest price. The CPR has evolved into a modern freight company. Its original passenger routes mostly vanished. Yet its path still carves through the Canadian imagination. The towns, cities, and trade networks it helped create remain central to the nation's geography and identity. As we reflect on this powerful history, ask yourself, was the cost of building the CPR measured in lives, land, and legacy worth the achievement? What parts of this story resonate most with you? If you found this journey through Canada's steel spine insightful, please like, comment, and subscribe, and explore more with our videos on Canada's forgotten Chinese railway workers, the Indigenous impact of westward expansion, and John Macdonald, hero or villain.